Number 1. Hitchhiker. Alright, so I know what you're thinking. Anyone who picks up a hitchhiker is stupid, or they get what they deserve. I've read a lot of the comments on many of these videos, and I've seen what people say about hitchhikers. But I think I had a very good reason to pick this hitchhiker up. I had a friend in the hospital, about a 3-hour drive from my home. He was in a very awful car accident and in a coma. I thought being by his side would be a very helpful thing for me to do for him. Maybe if he heard my voice, he might come out a lot quicker, you know? Whether it works or not, I don't know. But I thought it would be nice. Problem was that I had to work during the week. So I had to drive up to his town on the weekend, and then drive back. Also, his car accident was in the winter. And the one thing I really hate doing is driving in the winter. But I did it, because I really wanted to be there for my friend. On a very cold day in January, I'd spent nearly the entire weekend by my buddy's side. Unfortunately, there was very little change in his condition. By Sunday night, when I was ready to go home, I was starting to feel a little disheartened by the lack of progress. I had spent so much time in his room without watching television or anything that I hadn't even thought about checking the weather. It was freezing when I went outside, and it was overcast. I was expecting snow at some point, but I hoped I could get most of the way home before it got bad. I didn't get very far before it started falling, but it wasn't what I was expecting though. It was rain. I thought it was too cold outside for rain. However, when the rain was falling really heavy, I began to understand what was happening. It was freezing rain. My car began slipping, and I had to start driving a lot more carefully. I had never ever driven in an ice storm before. As I drove along, I was surprised to see someone standing on the side of the freeway up in the distance. He had his thumb out, so he was obviously looking for a ride. Immediately, every movie I ever saw with an evil hitchhiker in it crossed through my mind. I had never picked anyone up before, and I was scared to. Normally, when I saw someone, I just drove past them. But this guy was being hit by freezing rain, and I thought that maybe it had to be pretty awful for him. So, although I was speeding past him, my conscience got the better of me, and I slowed down and pulled over. The hiker ran up to the car and opened the door, getting into the passenger seat. The guy looked normal, but there was a considerable amount of ice on him. I didn't really care too much, though, that the ice would melt and get my car interior wet. I was just happy that I had done something that I considered to be a good deed. I tried asking the guy some stuff about him, but he never gave me any really good answers. I asked him where he was going, and he indicated he was going to the same city that I lived in. That wasn't much of a surprise, though. We talked for a little while, but in a way, the talking seemed stilted, but not too much of a shock. About a half hour after I picked the guy up, he asked if I could pull the car over somewhere so he could go to the bathroom. I had no problem with this. He told me he was familiar with the area, and there was an old gas station at the next exit that let people use the bathrooms without purchase. I followed his directions and pulled over. It didn't look like the gas station was even open, but there were some lights on. I pulled up, and the hitchhiker undid his seatbelt. He didn't get out of the car right away, though. He sat there, looking out my window. When I followed his gaze, I saw 3 big men dressed in black, slowly approaching my car. I moved quickly to the gear shift to put the car in reverse, but before I could, the hitchhiker pulled a knife out of his pocket and jabbed it right into the seat beside my shoulder. "Get out of the damn car," he said in a very threatening tone. I didn't move, thinking he may have been bluffing. But he then pulled the knife out of the chair and moved as if he was going to do it again. Shocked and scared, I quickly undid my seatbelt and moved out of the car. 2 of the 3 guys immediately grabbed me. They took my wallet and cell phone out of my pockets and knocked me over onto the ground. They all then made for my car. They got in and drove off with my vehicle, leaving me in the parking lot of an abandoned gas station with no car, no wallet, no money, and no phone. I was able to hitch a ride to the police station, although I had to walk for nearly an hour before I made it. As I walked in, though, I was shocked to see the men who attacked me were in there too, but they were all handcuffed to a bench behind the counter. When I reported what happened, it was explained that within 10 minutes of carjacking me, the car got pulled over for speeding. I wish I could say that lessened the horror I went through, but it really didn't. Number 2. In the car. I had the worst moment of my life once when I was in an ice storm. In fact, it was the first time I had even ever been in an ice storm. I'll go even further and say that before then, I wasn't really aware of what an ice storm was. I lived in Southern California, and at least in my lifetime, there was never an ice storm there. I had to do a cross-country drive for the first time in my life. A relative was having a wedding, and I really couldn't afford flying at the time. So I had to drive from Southern California to the East Coast, sleeping every night in my car. I wasn't too worried about the car sleeping. I had done it many times before. But this would be the longest drive I have ever been on in my life. On the second day of my trip, I was going through the mountains in Colorado. I was no stranger to mountains, having driven through them in California many times. I knew it would be different though, so I tried to be prepared. I slept my first night in a warm area, but by the second night, I was in a much colder and much higher area. Fortunately for me, I had brought a lot of blankets, so I would be able to keep myself warm. I found a nice place on the side of the road, in fact, in the parking lot of a rest area, to park my car. I curled up in the back seat, and fearing that it was going to get really cold during the night, made sure I was bundled up in blankets. I'm not sure when I woke up. I had my phone close to me, so I tried to grab for it to see what time it was. While I was fumbling for it, I realized how cold my hand was. I slightly peeked out over the blankets, and I was surprised looking at my car. I had parked on the far side of the parking lot, but the light from one of the street lamps still was shining into my car. And my car was completely covered in ice. And not only that, I could hear rain hitting my car hard. I realized then that I was in a storm of freezing rain. I had to wonder about what to do. I figured when I started my car up for a while, it would eventually melt the ice. Also, it wouldn't do me much good to do it in the middle of the ice storm, however. I decided to just go ahead and sleep for the rest of the night. I could warm my car up in the morning, after the freezing rainstorm passed, and then be on my way. I went back to sleep for a while, and something woke me up. Like anyone who was sleeping soundly, I did not know what it was at first, but then I felt it. My car bounced a bit. It sent a chill down my spine, but I tried not to worry about it. It could be the wind or something like that. But then, it bounced again, and again, and again. The bouncing was rhythmic enough for me to know that someone or something was making it bounce, and it was not the storm. My phone was once again not within my grasp, so I tried to find it by reaching out from under the blankets, but I couldn't reach or even locate it. But the car kept bouncing rhythmically, over and over again. I couldn't go back to sleep, but I didn't want to look out from under the blankets either. I almost felt if I didn't look, I wouldn't have to acknowledge that something or someone was doing this. But I also needed to know what was going on. So I slowly peeked out from under the mound of blankets I was under. I looked from the back seat up to the front of the car. I saw what looked like an incredibly large man standing in front of my car. I had never seen a man in person as large as he was, and all I could really see was his outline because the window was frozen solid. He was leaned over and had his hands resting on the hood of my car. He was pressing down over and over again, and that was what was making my car bounce. I didn't think he noticed that I had been peeking out, however. I then looked over to the side back window and jumped hard when I saw another man, equally as large. Although the glass was frozen, I could tell that the man was looking at me and looking right into my eyes. I yelled in fear and jumped, hitting my head on the door. Startled, I did the only thing I could think of to do. I reached under the driver's side door of my car. I reached under the driver's side seat of my car. When the guy knew that I knew he was there, he hit the window hard and it shattered all over the back seat. He started reaching for the handle to open the door. As quickly as he was able to do this, I was able to pull my gun from under the driver's seat. And without the frozen window obscuring the view, he saw the gun and froze. But the freezing lasted only a second, as he called out to his friend, told him I had a gun, and both guys retreated quickly. Beyond shaken, I jumped into the front seat and started my car up. I wanted to warm it up and get out of there. I had to keep an eye on my surroundings, trying to see if they were going to come back. It was nerve-wracking, and it took at least 20 minutes for the heat of my car to melt the ice enough for me to get out of there. But when I did, I drove and didn't stop until I made it to Denver, where I had to put plastic over my window. Number 3. Outside. I had this horrible experience once that happened in winter. I live alone in a small town in Illinois. I don't want to say where, though. I had a small house that I inherited right after I got out of college. It was in an old neighborhood, and a lot of houses in the area had been taken down. So, it was a really lonely-looking place. However, I really liked it because it was cozy. I wasn't used to the weather at the time. I had gone to college further south, and the winters were nowhere near as severe as they were in northern Illinois. On the night that this happened, the company I worked for closed down early. They let everyone go home because there was an ice storm on its way. I am ashamed to admit this, but I really didn't know what an ice storm even was. I found out pretty soon after, though. During the ride home, the snow had already begun falling, and it was becoming ice pretty quickly. I realized I really needed to get home before this got bad. I was able to get home without getting into any sort of accident. It was also dark by the time that I got out there. I can tell you it was a very good feeling to get my car into the garage and to get into my warm house. The storm got really, really bad. I was curious because I had never seen something like this before. So I had the porch lights on, and I sat in a chair and looked out my big picture window. It was pretty amazing how the light was captured in the falling ice, and it shined. I jumped though, when I saw someone out in the falling ice. Some guy was walking down the street, and he was walking very slowly. He looked over at my house, and stood there for a few moments before he moved on. I thought it was weird, because of the weather. I think anyone would be in a hurry to get inside where it was warm. But who knows really why people do what they do? I continued to watch the storm while I read a book. After a short while, I noticed again someone walking outside. I looked up, and it was the same guy as before. Again, he stopped and looked over at my house. I doubt he could have seen me, but that wasn't what concerned me. He was, yet again, walking outside in the middle of an ice storm, and that is just weird. After looking around for a while, he just continued down the street and went on his way. I was a little freaked out, so I got up and made sure that my doors were locked. And then I put my blinds down. I didn't really think that the guy would be up to anything, but I also wasn't really wanting to see him over and over again. I've definitely seen people do weird things in my life, so walking around in the freezing rain might just be something to add on to it. I read my book peacefully, and after an hour or two I went to bed. I fell asleep rather quickly, too. I woke up in the early morning to a very loud knocking on the door. Getting up, groggy, I went to the front door and went to open it. It was frozen shut, and I yelled to whomever was on the other side that it would take a minute to get open. I finally managed it, and when I did, 2 police officers were at the door. The cops told me that 2 houses were broken into the previous night, and several people were beaten pretty badly. The houses weren't robbed, though. I assumed that they wanted me to let them know if I'd seen anything, and then suddenly I remembered the guy that was walking around and around. But before I could explain it, they directed my attention to my doorknob. There were some of what looked like wires in the door. The police explained that they were instruments used to pick a door lock. They had gotten frozen in my door and then broken off. We later discovered that the man responsible for the beatings, the man that I noticed walking around the block, had tried to get into my house too. However, the freezing rain had kept him from getting in. To this day, I don't understand why someone would break into someone's house for no other reason but to beat them. I don't know, it's bizarre. I'm just happy I wasn't added to the list of victims that had had this happen to them. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. First, I want to apologize to everyone who has emailed or messaged me, and I have taken a while to get back to you. I've had a pretty busy few weeks. I will get back to everyone, and I do appreciate your patience. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or use the icon of Ichigo that will appear at the end of this closing. Feel free to leave a comment to let me know what you think of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. You can follow Ichigo and me on Facebook and Twitter by using the links in the description. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, email it to the address included in the description. My only requirement is that the story is original, meaning it has not been read on any other YouTube channel. In the meantime, please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.